Hey guys, today we're diving into another truly horrifying case. If you want to support my channel, make sure to subscribe and stay active. It really helps me out. I'd be super grateful for that. Let's get started. At around 2 o'clock in the morning, Houston police officers enter a 2-story house on Palmetto Street. In the yard, they find 2 teenagers, a young man and a young woman, standing under a street lamp. They say nothing. The young woman is visibly shaken, her eyes puffy and watery, while the young man remains calm, his gaze distant. The officers do not ask questions. One of them asks to turn off the alarm system. The young man lifts his head and presses a button on the keypad. The house gives no sense of a crime scene. Outside, it's silent. Inside, everything is neat, orderly, not a sound. No signs of disturbance or chaos. The officers climb to the 2nd floor. Tension mounts with every step. One of the doors is slightly ajar. From within, they hear labored breathing, no shouting or movement, just a raspy rhythm interrupted by occasional inhales. They enter the bedroom. The light is off. Right away, their eyes are drawn to the pillows, tightly draped over the heads of 2 individuals lying on the bed. No reaction to the intrusion. When an officer lifts the pillow covering the woman, he immediately steps back. She is deceased. There are 2 gunshot wounds to the head. Dried, darkened blood has seeped into the pillowcase. She isn't breathing. The man next to her is alive. Barely. He doesn't respond to verbal prompts, doesn't open his eyes. He has a gunshot wound to the head, but not through and through. He's conscious, though unable to speak. When medics arrive later, they'll describe his condition as critical. No weapon is visible. The room remains orderly. There's only a small hole in the ceiling and a darkening stain on the wall. No alarm sounds, no signs of aggressive behavior elsewhere in the house. Downstairs, it's just as quiet. Outside stand 2 minors, one of whom is the son of the victims. He's already said everything he thinks he should, but as it turns out later, not all of his statements match what the officers find inside the house. A pause hangs in the air, and with it, the first suspicions begin to form. Antonio Armstrong was born in Houston when his mother, Kay Winston, was just 15. Soon after, she married a man who already had 5 kids from a previous relationship. In their new blended family, Kay gave birth to 3 more children. Despite the challenges, she did her best to treat everyone equally. The family held firm to Christian values. Faith was central to their lives. From childhood, Antonio showed remarkable athletic talents. After graduating high school in Houston, he enrolled at the University of Texas and joined their football team. His mother supported him at every game. After college, he was signed by the Miami Dolphins, then continued his professional career in Canada, playing for the British Columbia Lions and later the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Injuries eventually ended his pro sports career, and he returned to Houston. From a young age, Antonio was deeply involved in church life. After his athletic career came to an end, he became an assistant pastor at the same congregation he had grown up in. It was there he met Dawn, a devoted and respected member of the community who actively participated in church activities. On July 14, 1998, they got married. Together, they not only built a family, but also launched a fitness business called First Class Training. Over time, they opened 3 gyms across Houston. Antonio also started a YouTube channel where he shared motivational videos. Before marrying Antonio, Dawn already had a son named Joshua, known to everyone as Josh. He was outgoing, kind, and athletic. Antonio legally adopted him and raised him as his own. The couple later welcomed a 2nd son, Antonio Jr., or AJ, followed by their youngest daughter, Kira. AJ was calm and physically active from an early age. His parents introduced him to sports young, and he followed in his father's footsteps, finding success on his high school football team. His childhood was shaped by discipline and strong faith-based values. Though Josh and AJ were stepbrothers, they referred to each other simply as brothers. Kira, the youngest, grew up in a more stable and financially secure environment. By 2016, Dawn and Antonio were living with AJ and Kira in a home on Palmetto Street in Houston. Their older son, Josh, who was 20 at the time, had moved into a rental just 2 minutes away. He was attending the Art Institute of Houston and hoped to pursue a music career. AJ, then 16, was a high school student preparing to move into upper-level classes. Kira, age 12, had just started middle school. All three children, including Josh, stayed in close contact with their grandmother, Kay, visiting her several times a week. To the outside world, the Armstrongs appeared to be the picture of a successful family. No one could have imagined that just months later, a crime would take place inside that very home, one that would forever change the lives of those who survived. Faith played a central role in the Armstrong household. The family regularly attended church services and actively participated in parish life. At home, there was a strong sense of order. Dawn maintained a tight daily schedule. She monitored schoolwork, set bedtimes, managed meals, and organized her children's free time. Each had responsibilities around the house. Late arrivals, secrecy, and missed classes were strictly unacceptable. Antonio took a keen interest in his son's academic progress and physical training, believing that sports built character. In elementary school, AJ was polite, diligent, and well-behaved. But over time, signs of struggle emerged. Tardiness, missed assignments, and minor behavioral issues began to appear. Josh, the older son, visited less often. His communication with the younger siblings became selective. Though Dawn and Antonio never outwardly distinguished between their biological and stepchildren, their interactions with Josh grew increasingly formal. He sensed emotional distance from his stepfather, didn't share the family's religious beliefs, and sought greater independence. Kyra, the youngest daughter, received special attention from her mother. Her upbringing was strict, but full of care. Dawn maintained control over everything, from schoolwork to her social interactions. The parents frequently checked their children's phones, read through messages, and tracked their locations. Any suspicion of broken rules led to consequences. The household operated under full parental oversight, from homework to weekend activities. Dawn kept notes on AJ's behavior in her phone and regularly discussed strategies with Antonio to manage their son. After the discovery of the Armstrong couple in their upstairs bedroom, investigators began a full sweep of the house. Particular focus was placed on any signs of forced entry, but none were found. All windows were closed, glass unbroken, and the locks intact. Both the front and back doors showed no signs of tampering. The home was equipped with a security system connected to Dawn's cell phone, which logged each arming and disarming event, as well as any door activity. That night, the system was armed at approximately 12:52 a.m. and disarmed at exactly 1:40 a.m., the same time a call was made to emergency services. This timeline indicated that no suspicious activity occurred between those times. No doors or windows had been open. Investigators concluded that only someone inside the house or someone with the access code could have disabled the system. There were no reports of any visitors that night, and no one in the family had given out spare keys. On the first floor, officers noticed that a drawer in the kitchen, where a Smith & Wesson .22 caliber handgun was usually stored, had been pulled all the way open. The drawer was empty, which could have indicated haste or a staged scene. Later, the gun was found in a downstairs closet near the staircase. Next to it was a torn piece of paper with a message written in French. "I've been watching you for a long time. Follow me." The handwriting was shaky, the letters slanted, and there were no fingerprints. The paper itself was ordinary, no watermark or identifying marks. Authorities were unable to confirm who had written it. Investigators also noted a strange mark on the ceiling of AJ's third-floor room. a bullet hole that appeared to have been fired upward through the ceiling. Based on the angle and trajectory, the shot seemed to have been fired at close range. However, the circumstances remained unclear. The bullet itself was never recovered. The house was also equipped with motion sensors, which tracked movement between floors. According to the log, after 1:24 a.m., the only activity recorded was on the second floor near the parents' bedroom. No movement was detected on the third floor, where the children's rooms were located. This conflicted with AJ's account, in which he claimed he went downstairs after hearing the gunshots to find out what happened. His reported movements and timing weren't supported by the system's records. Kira showed officers her room and explained that she had been awakened by a loud noise, but stayed in bed, not going near the door or leaving her room. AJ told police he had hidden in a closet on the third floor and stayed there until the officers arrived. He also claimed to have seen a masked figure leaving the parents' bedroom and heading downstairs. However, this alleged sighting wasn't supported by any footage, alarm records, or surveillance systems. A K9 unit was brought in to detect any unfamiliar scents that might indicate an intruder. The dog found no foreign human scent trails leading from the front or back entrances. All confirmed movement was confined inside the house. The gap between the last recorded activity and the system being turned off was less than 15 minutes. In that time, if the perpetrator was not someone living there, they would have had to enter the home, commit the act, and leave, without triggering any alarms or leaving a trace. This raised critical questions. Physically, entry into the home could only have happened if the security system had been deactivated from the inside. The question of who had the means and reason to do that remained unanswered. The day after the incident, 16-year-old Antonio Armstrong Jr. was brought to the police station to give a statement. Since he was a minor, the interview was conducted in the presence of his grandmother, Kay, as required by law. The recorded footage from that session would later become a key piece in the investigation. From the very beginning, AJ's behavior drew the attention of detectives. During questioning, AJ repeated the phrase, "I didn't do it," 19 times, despite not being directly accused of anything at that point. His tone was calm, almost detached. At times, he appeared distracted and failed to focus on important details. Officers noted that not once did he ask about the condition of his parents or express concern about what had happened to them. During a second round of questioning, his demeanor remained the same. He showed no visible signs of shock, didn't ask to contact any family members, and never inquired about funeral arrangements. According to the officers, he came across as emotionally disconnected. His words and behavior didn't align with how most people would expect a teenager to react after losing both parents in a violent attack. Although AJ wasn't detained after the interview and no formal charges were filed, he immediately became a central figure in the case. Investigators began compiling information about his behavior, social circle, and any signs of tension with his parents. While physical evidence was being processed, AJ's statements became the first element that didn't align with the broader timeline of events. As his academic discipline began to slip, AJ also started to hide things from his parents. He used 2 phones, one known to his family and another he had purchased without their knowledge. Through the second phone, he communicated with a girlfriend whose relationship was not approved by the family. Dawn didn't know the girl personally, considered the relationship inappropriate, and attempted to limit their contact by monitoring his messages and blocking certain apps. During a search of AJ's room after the incident, police found a marijuana wrapper hidden in his underwear drawer. On his phone, investigators discovered text messages where he discussed the use and purchase of banned substances, along with saved photos of homemade cigarettes and chats with friends. These findings contradicted the image of a respectful and obedient teen and revealed a side of his life that his parents either didn't know about or chose not to acknowledge. A few months before the tragedy, there was an incident involving his father's car. One day, while his parents were away, AJ took his father's white Infiniti without permission. The car was later found with damage from hitting a curb. The repairs were costly, but the family decided to keep the matter private. Antonio sat down for a serious conversation with his son and began considering whether to transfer AJ to a different school or send him to live with his grandmother to instill better discipline. Tension within the family continued to build. AJ increasingly viewed the strict household rules as overwhelming. In the weeks leading up to the tragedy, there were several intense arguments between him and Dawn. In private conversations with friends, AJ described the control at home as suffocating and invasive. His lifestyle choices began to drift further from his parents' expectations. As the restrictions piled up, so did the internal pressure. Later, investigators would consider this dynamic as one of the possible contributing factors behind a decision that ultimately altered the course of the entire family's life. Josh Armstrong's lifestyle was also very different from the structure maintained in the household. His time in college was turbulent. He repeatedly dropped out and re-enrolled. Ongoing personal struggles impacted his mental well-being. Dawn made efforts to stay in touch with him, but her role had been reduced to long-distance oversight. During the investigation, it came to light that Josh had been struggling with anxiety, depression, and paranoid episodes. He had received treatment at medical facilities, and doctors' notes revealed that during acute phases, he experienced auditory hallucinations, panic attacks, and episodes of detachment from reality. One psychiatric report mentioned an obsessive fear of being monitored through electronic devices. He was diagnosed with a severe mental health condition that required ongoing medication. 2 months before the crime, a significant incident occurred. Josh attempted to start a fire in the family home. According to police and medical reports, he lit a blanket on fire near the entrance. The flames were quickly extinguished. After this, Dawn took him to a hospital for a mental health evaluation. He was prescribed antipsychotic medication, but no one monitored whether he was actually taking it. Testimonies from Kira and their grandmother Kay confirmed that Josh would occasionally show up near the house, acting oddly and avoiding conversation. He was not involved in AJ's life and didn't express any interest in his affairs. After the fire, the family avoided talking about the situation. Dawn chose not to file a formal report, opting instead to handle it privately. Despite his background, Josh was not a focus of the investigation in the early days following the crime. He wasn't questioned during the initial inquiries. No reports mention a formal interview. Moreover, he was never fingerprinted, had no DNA samples collected, and his whereabouts on the night of the incident were not verified. This later raised serious questions from the defense. Kay told investigators that on the day of the crime, Josh appeared distant and silent. He didn't show concern or ask questions about what had happened. According to her, he just sat in the chair, staring at the wall and saying nothing. She attempted to speak with him, but he gave short answers and avoided engagement. Josh's medical history also included notes about prior episodes of aggressive behavior. He had been placed under outpatient observation twice due to thoughts of self-harm and high levels of anxiety. In both instances, doctors recommended constant supervision and medication, but each time, communication with the facility ended shortly after his release. One of the lingering questions in the case was whether he had any connection to the events that unfolded in the home. Given his physical proximity to the scene, the previous fire incident, and a diagnosed condition with known risk factors, it would seem reasonable for him to at least have been treated as a witness. Yet the investigation focused almost exclusively on AJ, overlooking a potentially unstable family member who had access to the home, understood the family's routines, and had shown dangerous behavior in the past. 7 years after Antonio and Dawn Armstrong lost their lives, a new piece of evidence emerged. presented by the prosecution as a critical link implicating AJ. It involved a drop of blood, reportedly belonging to his father, found on a t-shirt collected from the crime scene back in 2016. However, the circumstances surrounding this discovery raised more questions than answers. AJ's clothing had been bagged by police on the day of the incident and sealed in a labeled, transparent evidence bag. According to protocol, the items were visually inspected in 2016 and no blood traces were noted at the time. For several years, the clothing was not sent for forensic testing. Only in 2023, just ahead of a third attempt at trial, did an officer reviewing the case file report a suspicious mark under the tag on the t-shirt packaging. Upon re-examination under lab conditions, a small brownish-red spot was indeed found underneath the original label that had been affixed over part of the fabric. Forensic analysis revealed that the substance contained DNA matching the profile of Antonio Armstrong Sr. The trace was tiny, about 2 millimeters in size, but its presence was used as a basis to reopen the charges. However, the defense immediately questioned the credibility of this discovery. First, why hadn't this crucial piece of evidence, one that could dramatically alter the direction of the case, been documented earlier? Second, how could blood end up on the inside of the shirt, beneath a police evidence tag that had reportedly been placed there at the time of collection? That sequence of events seemed illogical. According to official protocol, the evidence bag had not been opened until 2023. That meant the only way the blood could have ended up under the label was if it had been there from the beginning. But then why had it gone unnoticed by investigators, forensic technicians, and attorneys during prior reviews of the material? Moreover, the label itself was factory type, with clean edges and firm adhesion to the fabric. There were no signs it had been tampered with or removed. The discovery of this trace so many years later sparked speculation that it may have been planted. AJ's attorneys emphasized that after 2 failed trials, the prosecution had run out of new arguments. And then, just before the 3rd trial, a new piece of evidence appeared that had never been mentioned in any original reports. The defense called for an independent analysis. They also requested all storage facility logs to trace the chain of custody for the evidence bag over the course of those 7 years. Concerns were also raised about the conditions in which the evidence had been stored. Some items, including the clothing, were temporarily moved between departments, and responsibility for maintaining their security had shifted several times. A complete set of documentation confirming the bag's integrity was never produced. Prosecutors claimed this was simply a technical oversight and that the evidence remained untouched. During the investigation, it was determined that the blood trace was located on the inside of the shirt near the collar, around the chest area. The prosecution argued that AJ was close to his father at the moment the shot was fired, and the drop could have landed on his shirt if he had leaned over or stood nearby. However, technical analysis failed to provide a clear answer as to how, when, or by what means the biological material ended up on the garment. Despite the uncertainty surrounding this piece of evidence, it became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case during the 3rd trial. The story of the blood trace under the label became a turning point. Each side interpreted it differently. The prosecution called it a breakthrough, while the defense saw it as a sign of systemic failure. A new dimension of conflict emerged. Beyond guilt or innocence, the case now called into question the reliability of the procedures upon which the entire justice system is supposed to stand. The criminal case against AJ Armstrong became one of the longest running in Harris County. The trial process stretched over several years and involved 3 separate court proceedings. Each one was followed closely by the public and marked by intense debates between the prosecution and defense. The first trial took place in 2019, 3 years after the crime. Prosecutors argued that the act was committed from inside the house and that AJ was the only person with both access and opportunity. However, the defense emphasized the lack of direct evidence linking AJ to the crime. The firearm did not contain his fingerprints, there was no blood found on his clothing at the time, and law enforcement had not fully investigated the possible involvement of Josh, the older brother. The proceedings sparked intense public debate, but the jury was unable to reach a unanimous verdict. The trial ended without a resolution. The second trial occurred in 2022. Both sides presented essentially the same evidence, but with slightly different emphasis. The prosecution leaned more heavily on AJ's illogical behavior, applying emotional pressure in court. The defense reiterated that the investigation was one-sided and that a potentially unstable relative, Josh, had been largely overlooked. Just like before, the jury was divided and the case once again ended in a mistrial. The third trial was held in 2023. By then, a new piece of evidence had surfaced, a drop of blood said to belong to Antonio Armstrong Sr. It became the cornerstone of the prosecution's argument. Prosecutors claimed the presence of blood pointed to AJ being in close proximity to the victim at the time of the incident. They also provided details from the security system and motion detectors, stating that no one else could have physically committed the crime without disabling the system from inside the house. The defense, on the other hand, accused investigators of manipulating the case. But this time, despite ongoing disagreements, the jury returned a verdict: guilty. It was only after the third attempt that AJ Armstrong was found guilty of committing the crime against his parents. The court sentenced him to life in prison with the possibility of parole. In the U.S. criminal justice system, a person can only be convicted if the prosecution proves guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, a foundational principle in American law. Reasonable doubt means that if jurors have any justifiable uncertainty regarding the defendant's guilt, they must acquit. In AJ Armstrong's case, that principle came into question. There was no direct evidence tying AJ to the crime. The weapon, his father's gun, carried no fingerprints from AJ. There were no signs of a struggle at the scene, and the blood allegedly found on AJ's shirt wasn't discovered until 7 years later. The prosecution's main argument centered on his behavior after the incident and statements that were seen as inconsistent. Investigators overlooked potentially important details. Not all biological traces in the house were examined, fingerprint analysis on doors wasn't conducted, and windows were not checked for microfragments that could indicate forced entry. Portions of the alarm system's log were unavailable. Key data on movement between floors during the critical time was either corrupted or lost, and no independent forensic review was performed on those elements. Josh was never called to testify in court. His alibi was not verified, and the investigation never treated him as a potential suspect. This decision was never officially explained in any of the case documents. A note found near Dawn Armstrong's body also went unexamined. No forensic testing was done on the paper, handwriting, or possible DNA traces. No expert ever confirmed who might have left it. Yet, this piece of evidence was never used as a reason to broaden the investigation. Throughout all three trials, the same arguments were presented to the jury, without any new lines of inquiry or direct evidence. Instead, the focus remained on AJ's behavior, with emotional emphasis overshadowing the absence of irrefutable facts. The final decision was based on interpretation, not on undeniable proof. The concept of reasonable doubt exists to prevent judicial errors, especially when clear evidence is lacking. In AJ Armstrong's case, his guilt was never fully proven, not by timing, not by physical evidence, and not by motive. Nevertheless, the court opted to close the case rather than acknowledge that doubt in itself is not a crime. Following the verdict, AJ Armstrong didn't remain silent. From prison, he gave several interviews to journalists and independent creators, commenting on the charges, reflecting on his family, and sharing his perspective. He continues to maintain his innocence, stating that he would never harm his parents. In these interviews, AJ described his family life as complicated but not hostile. He acknowledged having typical teenage conflicts with his parents over discipline and household rules, but emphasized that he looked up to his father and leaned on his mother for support. He insists he loved them and could never have done what he's been accused of. One of the core themes in his statements is a sharp criticism of the investigation. AJ claims that detectives targeted him from the very beginning, disregarding alternative theories. He also expressed hope for a future appeal, stating he is willing to fight for his name, no matter how long it takes. AJ believes that justice can be served if the case is reconsidered without bias and with the help of independent experts. In one interview, he said that if his father had survived, he would have told the truth about what really happened. AJ firmly believes Antonio Sr. would have defended him, stood by his side, and prevented the family from being torn apart. That belief sounds like a final plea for trust. Kate met AJ after his arrest. Their relationship began during the investigation, and she knew exactly what she was getting into. Despite the accusations, she believed in his innocence. They started corresponding and later began visiting during court-approved visits. After several years, they got married. Their marriage was legally registered while AJ was still under court supervision between trials. A year after their wedding, they had a son. Kate is raising him on her own. All he knows about his father comes from photographs, brief phone calls, and short video messages AJ sends from prison. When the boy asks where his dad is, Kate answers honestly, "He's in a place he shouldn't be. But he loves us, and he's waiting for us." Kate says she lives in a constant state of waiting. Court dates, appeals, paperwork, attorneys, it's all part of her daily routine. She works, raises their son, responds to media inquiries, and prepares legal documents all at once. In interviews, she says she doesn't allow herself to get tired. In her words, if she gives up, AJ will remain stuck in the system forever. Her belief is what keeps both him and their family going. She admits that at first she had doubts, but the deeper she looked into the case, the more convinced she became that the prosecution's narrative was incomplete and the verdict unjust. Kate says that from the very beginning, she has felt the pressure. Public opinion is divided, and she regularly receives hostile messages accusing her of blind loyalty or trying to defend a criminal. She doesn't know how many more years this will take, but she's certain the truth will come out. According to her, the only real fear is doing nothing. Kate doesn't see herself as a victim. She sees herself as part of a story that isn't over yet. Her role, she says, is to make sure it doesn't end in silence. As long as AJ remains behind bars, she will keep waiting. Not because she has to, but because she believes. If you step away from the official version and remove the bias, one honest question remains. What if AJ really didn't pull the trigger? Who entered the house, disabled the alarm system, bypassed the children, and fired the fatal shots? Or was that person already inside? The most obvious alternative theory points to Joshua, the older brother. He was present at the house on the day of the crime, but he was never formally questioned, never tested, never brought to court. Why? From the first hours, investigators chose a single direction: a J. No real effort was made to explore other possibilities. When the justice system relies on assumptions instead of evidence, any doubt becomes a risk of wrongful conviction. The process lost sight of what matters most. Not the profile of a suspect, but whether anyone else had both motive and opportunity. Instead of a search for truth, the case became a matter of settling for the simplest explanation. Maybe he is guilty, but what if he's not? What if the evidence was mishandled, if something was planted, if the narrative was shaped before the facts were fully known. If any of those what-ifs are true, then this case remains unsolved, and dangerously so. Not because of its brutality, but because of what could be a serious mistake. AJ is serving a life sentence. But the quieter question still lingers. What if it wasn't him? Thanks for watching, everyone. Your support means a lot to me, and you can help my channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video. Your engagement really makes a difference. See you soon.